She once missed a significant opportunity just because he had a fever in the middle of the night. She used to quietly cook dinner after work, just so he wouldn't come home to an empty house. But then he left silently, without a single word of explanation, and still she waited, kept everything the same, as if being good enough would somehow make him come back. Until one morning, she looked in the mirror and didn't recognize herself anymore. Have you ever been in that moment, when you showed up in someone's life with all your sincerity, only to realize, one day, that you've become nothing more than a faint shadow in their world? We learn to love through sacrifice, but few ever teach us how to love without losing ourselves in the process. The more you give, the easier it is to be taken for granted, and in those small, unnoticed things, your self-worth slowly drains away quietly and painfully. It's time to stop, not to blame anyone, but to wake up, not to change someone else, but to change your place in the story, from the one who waits to the one who chooses. If this touches something in your heart, stay. This video is for you, and you deserve to see yourself in a fully and completely honest light. 1. The dusty mirror. When you no longer recognize yourself. There are moments in life when no one else has to hurt you. All it takes is walking past a mirror and stopping, not because your hair's a mess or your eyes have dark circles, but because, in that moment, you realize you no longer recognize yourself. That gaze looking back at you, it used to hold light. Now, it's just a vacant blur, a pair of eyes that no longer sparkle, as if they've forgotten something profoundly important along the way. The mirror hanging quietly in that old attic is the same. Once, it reflected a Daniel full of life, a man who loved life, loved mornings, loved coffee, loved running through quiet streets. However, a fine layer of dust accumulated over the days and months. He lost himself and began to obscure it. Much like Daniel, he allowed love to transform him into a mere shadow, day by day. At first, she loved him because he was exactly who he was. A kind, warm person, deep enough to truly listen, vibrant enough to make others feel at ease. But then came the unanswered messages, the conversations that kept getting delayed, the meetups that became depending on the schedule. All of it made Daniel start to doubt, not her but himself. And so, like thousands of others in love, Daniel began to sacrifice. He gave up his morning journaling, gave up running, gave up brewing that perfectly balanced cup of coffee he once took pride in, better than a barista. He used to joke, every morning, he didn't wake up to live, he woke up to check if she had replied. The room no longer smelled like coffee, it smelled like anxiety. His face was no longer a map of dreams, but a draft constantly being erased and rewritten, trying to reshape himself to fit someone else. And through all of this, he thought it was love, but it wasn't. It was the unconscious surrender of self, driven by the fear of being left behind. Epictetus once said, "We suffer not from the events in our lives, but from our judgment about them." Daniel didn't truly hurt because of her silence. He was hurt because he told himself he was no longer worthy of her attention. That mistaken belief, that was the real prison. He locked himself in, and that's the tragedy. When you stop loving yourself just to hold on to someone who no longer sees you the same way. Like an old shirt tucked in the back of a closet, torn at the shoulders, frayed at the seams, you still hesitate to throw it away. Not because it's still in style, but because it belonged to a beautiful personal time in your life. But holding on to it doesn't bring back the past, does it? Just like holding on to a love that's worn out won't make that heart beat for you like it did in the beginning. If love makes you shrink a little more each day, makes you apologize for things you didn't do, makes you give up the parts of yourself you once loved, then that love isn't worth holding on to, because real love doesn't ask you to become smaller. It doesn't make you a faded version of yourself. That old mirror in the attic, it was never broken, just covered in dust. And the part of you, the part that used to be vibrant, grateful for life, joyfully alive, it's not gone. It's just waiting for you to wipe away the dust of fear, of dependence, of self-abandonment. Daniel didn't begin again with anything dramatic. He started with the small things, but they were honest. A cup of coffee in the morning, brewed just for himself. A run, not for fitness, but for the feeling of freedom. A journal entry, not to impress, just to be real. And then, one day, he saw himself in the mirror again. Not a perfect man, but a man living truthfully. His eyes might still have held a hint of sadness, but the light was back. That gaze said something he once didn't dare to believe. I am worthy. Do you still recognize yourself? Not to blame whoever hurt you, but to ask, who am I living for? No one in this world can make you feel whole if you don't see your worth first. Don't wait for someone else to wipe the mirror clean for you. Put your hand on it and begin. Sometimes, just seeing yourself clearly is already enough to come back to life. 2. The invisible grains of sand when effort goes unseen. There are relationships where people slowly forget the line between giving and being drained. At first, every act of giving comes from joy, a surprise gift, a late night message just to ask if they slept well, or quietly sitting and listening as the one you love talks endlessly about things that don't involve you. These small, seemingly trivial things are how the heart says, I'm here, I care. But what happens when all that effort slowly becomes invisible? Like holding sand in your palm, the tighter you squeeze, the more the grains slip through your fingers, no matter how hard you try to keep them, and care too. If constantly given, without being appreciated, will one day turn to ashes. Has anyone ever stopped to ask, why am I always the one to start the conversation? The one who remembers the birthday, plans the gift, yet when it's my birthday, the room is empty. There are late nights when the entire day passes in silence, without a single message to check in, and then suddenly, a text appears not because they missed you, but because they need something. It's a feeling hard to name, not quite pain, but certainly not whole, and in that moment, we quietly begin to ask, have the first made myself too easy to overlook, too easy to be taken for granted, too easy for my feelings to be dismissed, so easy that I'm no longer seen as a person, but as a tool, a presence always available, but never truly valued. Sometimes, the sadness doesn't come from what someone did to hurt you. It comes from the silence, the lack of care, the repeated small things that, added together, are enough to exhaust a person. A late apology, a forgotten dinner, a call that goes ignored. These details may seem insignificant, but they carry weight, quiet, steady weight, because hearts don't break from grand betrayals, but from the lack of presence in the moments that mattered. Someone once said, real love isn't in what's said, it's in being there when it counts. And yet, in this world, sometimes the only presence we feel is our own, while the other person remains far away, only returning when it's convenient. Indifference, quiet and unintentional, is what kills love the fastest, not because it's loud, but because it's slow, like a lingering drizzle that gradually chills the soul. When patience is exploited, kindness is treated as duty, and effort becomes expected, all that's left is disappointment. And then, in a rare moment of clarity, We realize if we keep giving without return, in the end, the only thing we're left holding is an empty hand. No, thank you. No recognition, just exhaustion, and a silent question, do I deserve to be loved the way I love others? From somewhere deep within, a quiet awakening begins. Not blame, not a wish for things to change, just a recognition. Worth isn't found in someone else's validation, but in knowing when to stop. Because when you stop expecting too much, the heart stops getting hurt by unmet hopes. The Stoics once taught, true happiness doesn't depend on anything outside of us. It's born from an inner choice, the choice to love, to give, but not lose yourself in the process. No one truly values what comes too easily. A heart willing to sacrifice everything, if not protected, will eventually be treated as something ordinary, just like sand. You can't hold it by squeezing tightly. You have to learn to open your palm, let the grains that wish to stay, stay, and let those that drift away go. And in the end, maybe what matters most isn't whether others see you. It's whether you can look back at your quiet efforts and say, that was enough. No more pushing, no more waiting, just gently walking away from the place where your heart is no longer cared for, to begin learning, again, how to cherish yourself. 3. The tree in the desert, when you keep blooming without being watered. There are moments when the human heart feels like a desert, vast, dry, and so endless that you no longer know which direction you're heading. But strangely, in the middle of that desert, a small tree still manages to bloom, not because it's been watered, not because someone cared for it, but simply because it refuses to die in silence. A one-sided relationship is much the same. People keep giving, keep loving on their own, worrying on their own, forgiving on their own, all because they fear emptiness, because they want to believe that if their sincerity is deep enough, the other person will eventually change. But sometimes, that belief is what wears the heart down the most. Ethan was once that person. He always remembered anniversaries, always made the first move to make peace after an argument, and often prepared little gifts for no particular reason. He even remembered the tiny, seemingly meaningless things, like the song she played whenever she felt tired. But what he got in return were indifferent words, distant looks, and long, dragging silences, as if love only existed on one side. There were nights he came home after a long day of work. The lights were on. Dinner was left for him along with a small note. I already ate. Coming home late tomorrow. Nothing was technically wrong, but when that happens too often, it stops being about convenience and becomes a sign of growing distance. A cactus can survive in the desert, but when it blooms, it's not a sign of joy, it's a signal of exhaustion. One-sided love is the same. When someone keeps trying to bloom, keeps trying to bring something beautiful to a barren place, they're draining themselves without receiving anything in return. Investing emotions into a one-way street is like pouring water into a broken vase. Every time you give, you tell yourself, just a little more. But the silence that follows makes you question your worth, not because someone did something terrible, but because no one did anything at all, and you're the only one who keeps trying. One afternoon, Ethan sat quietly in the same familiar room. His phone was silent. A message arrived not from her, but from an old friend checking in, just casually. And that one simple line was enough to make his heart sink. How long had it been since anyone asked, "How was your day?" How long had it been since he felt truly seen? The Stoics once taught, happiness doesn't come from controlling others, but from letting go of what's beyond our control. Ethan couldn't make her love him the way he needed, but he could stop trading parts of himself to hold on to something that had already dried up. From that point on, he stopped texting every morning, stopped pushing his feelings aside just to keep the peace, stopped writing apologies for things he didn't do wrong, and in that space, he began to hear himself again. Love should never be a place where one person has to hold up the entire sky. If a relationship forces you to shrink yourself, to live below who you are, to endure too much, then it's not love, it's a desert. And the one still trying is the tree slowly withering in silence. Emotional breaking points rarely come from a single blow, they come from erosion. It's when you're next to someone but feel more alone than when you're actually by yourself. It's when you no longer feel excited to send that message, because deep down, you know no one will reply. Ethan stopped blooming, not because he ran out of love, but because he wanted to preserve what was still alive in him, the part that once smiled at the sunrise, that once felt whole standing alone in the world. If love is making you shrink, wear down, quietly hurt because no one notices, then maybe it's time to stop blooming. You don't have to blossom just to prove you care. You only need to exist as yourself, and stop sacrificing the one thing most precious, your inner peace. So, if you've loved with all your heart and still received nothing in return, stop. Not because you've failed, but because you've given enough. Enough love, enough patience, enough grace. And now, it's time to have enough courage to walk away, to find a place that isn't just a desert, but where there is water, eyes that truly see you, and hands ready to grow something with you. Remember, your heart wasn't born to dry out. It deserves to be watered, to bloom in the right place, with the right person. If where you're standing is only desert, then stop forcing yourself to flower. Just walk away, toward where you can truly live. 4. The locked room, when you're afraid to open the door and walk away. Some people leave without taking any luggage, without leaving anything behind. No goodbye, no explanation. They walk out of your life as lightly as a passing breeze, but their absence sits heavy on your chest like a stone, quiet, sudden, and cruel in a way you could never prepare for. They disappear as if they never belonged here, leaving only a long, endless silence in the heart of the one left behind. At first, you try to find a reason. You go back through every old conversation, clinging to every small detail, hoping to uncover some clue that will help you understand what happened. But the more you search, the deeper you fall into a maze with no exit, where every effort to explain their departure leads to the same conclusion: they chose not to need you anymore. And the most terrifying part isn't losing someone. It's losing yourself in the process of holding on to something you were never meant to control. Then, one day, you find yourself sitting in a familiar room, the room of waiting, of unanswered forgiveness, of blind hope that they will come back and realize how hard you tried. That room has no bars, no locks, and no one keeping you there, and yet you don't leave, because the fear of what's outside feels bigger than the pain inside. Fear of starting over, fear of admitting that everything you built with your whole heart wasn't held onto by anyone else. And then, in a quiet moment, on a slow, rainy afternoon, when there's nothing left to break you, you suddenly go still, not with bitterness, but with a soft collapse of the soul. You don't cry, don't scream. You just sit there, as if for the first time, you're truly facing yourself after a long, exhausting dream. And a voice breaks inside you, not loud, but clear, like a hand pressing gently on your heart. What more do I have to prove? You think back to all the times you apologized for things that weren't your fault. The nights you waited for a message, only to get a scene. The times you made yourself small, tucked away your real feelings so you wouldn't burden anyone else. All those quiet surroundings built up into an invisible wall that held your soul prisoner. And you suddenly understand, if that place never bloomed, even after you poured in all your sincerity, then it was never your fault. You don't need anyone to come unlock the door. You don't need an explanation. That door was never locked. It just didn't have a handle on the inside. And you never dared to try pushing it open. You get up, not with blazing resolve, but with a very human weariness, a kind of tiredness that leads to awakening. Awakening to the truth that no one is worth sacrificing yourself for, to the point of losing who you are. No one is worth the heartache of endlessly patching up wounds they never cared to cause. The image in your mind isn't of a dramatic goodbye, but of a withered tree standing in the desert. For years, it held its head high, waiting for rain from a sky that never answered. But today, it no longer looks up. It chooses instead to grow its roots deep into the earth, to search for its water, because it knows if it doesn't feed itself, no one else will. And you're the same. You are no longer the one waiting for the door to open, no longer the one hoping they'll return with a last-minute act of tenderness. You begin to listen to yourself again. Begin to water your dried-out soul with stillness, with old habits once forgotten, with learning to love the part of yourself you once abandoned, no longer hoping someone will understand, no longer needing anyone to stay. Only one thing remains, the self-respect that rises from the wreckage. You don't awaken like a warrior coming home, but like someone stepping out of the dark, hands still trembling, heart still sore, but with a different kind of light in their eyes. The light of someone who knows they don't need one more day of tolerating what they never deserved. Someone who knows that endurance, too, can be a prison, and the key was never anywhere else. All it takes is courage, just once, to place your hand over your heart, sit in silence, and say truthfully, "I am enough." And in that moment, every door begins to open. 5. The echo of emptiness, when silence becomes a wake-up call. It's not the shouting, it's not the arguments. Sometimes, it's silence that echoes the loudest in a person's mind. There are things we fail to notice when they're still present every day, but once they disappear like light leaving a room, it's the darkness that begins to reveal what it had long concealed. There was someone who quietly did all the small things in a relationship, like a night watchman of a city, unnamed, unseen, yet always there, watching over, protecting, silently preserving the peace. Every caring message, every well-wish on a rainy day, every quiet longing never spoken aloud, all of it was like a small light burning through the night that no one paid attention to. But one day, the night watchman disappeared, without a sound, without a goodbye, and the city, the one that once ignored that silent presence, started to feel unfamiliar, not because something dramatic happened, but because the small familiar things were suddenly gone. That absence became an echo, an invisible emptiness that rang through the heart of the one who had grown used to being cared for without ever needing to return it. What was once taken for granted now felt distant, and the other person began to realize it wasn't that someone had changed, but that they had lost something that once filled their life with the simplest forms of love, that emptiness. It didn't arrive all at once. It crept in, little by little, like night wind slipping through a forgotten window. One morning with no good wishes, one birthday that no one remembered, one time falling ill, with no one asking how you were. That's when the emptiness became real, because it had once been filled with genuine care. And it's in that silence that a voice starts to echo, "You were once cared for, far more than you ever realized." This isn't to blame, it's awakening, a gentle call, but powerful enough to stir the heart. And the one who walked away, they don't return, they don't need to win, they don't need regret. They simply step far enough back for the other to see what was lost. That is the power of silence, not as a sign of weakness, but as a quiet declaration of strength. I choose to walk away, so I no longer become the only one holding on to something that's already fading. A Stoic doesn't try to bend others to their will, because the simple truth is, we cannot control what lies beyond ourselves. The way they left, their silence, their forgetfulness, none of that is ours to change. But one thing remains fully within our choice: how we walk out of that story. Not to make them feel sorry, not to prove anything, but to preserve our dignity, something we may have unknowingly given up, just to keep someone from walking away. Stepping back is not surrender. It's the conscious choice to stop pouring effort into a place that has stopped valuing it. Just like a night watchman turning off the lights and leaving the post, not because they hate the city, but because they understand there's no point standing guard over a place that no longer needs you. And the most beautiful part is this: in that emptiness, you don't need anyone to acknowledge you were right. You don't need anyone to come back. What you need is the quiet certainty that you made the right choice, not to wear yourself out in a search where no one is truly listening. Maybe they'll wake up, maybe they'll forget, but you don't live your life waiting for someone else to awaken. You live to know that no matter who turns their back, you still have your path ahead. An emptiness, when created with intention, doesn't leave you feeling empty. It's like peeling the cloth off a finished painting so you can begin a new canvas. No longer the one silently coloring someone else's world, but the one holding the brush, choosing the colors of your own life. The night watchman didn't disappear out of disappointment. They simply knew it was time to stop guarding the dreams of those who never valued peace. And in their quiet footsteps leaving, they left behind something no words ever could, a silence deep enough for the other to finally face themselves. 6. Rebirth in action. When you begin returning to yourself. Sometimes, what awakens a person isn't a great shock, but a very quiet morning. No waiting messages, no alarm ringing, just a soft patch of sunlight fading on the edge of the table, and a vague feeling that you're living the same old day all over again. You sit there, holding a cup of cold coffee left from yesterday, looking around the still room, and suddenly realize you've been away from yourself for far too long. Then you step out back, open the door to the dusty storage shed. In one dark corner sits the old bike, a piece of memory you thought you'd forgotten. How many years has it been since you touched it? You pull off the cover, and the dust rises like a sigh from time itself. You reach for the key. The engine coughs, raspy, resisting, just like your heart at the start of something new. But then, a long hum. It moves, just like you. For the first time after months of silence, you're learning how to live again. Nothing big has changed. You don't draw up any grand plans. It's just that today, you wake up a little earlier than usual, brew a cup of hot tea not for anyone else, but to quietly remind yourself you still deserve care. You step outside, take a walk around the block, fill your lungs with cold air, feel the wind run through your hair, and somehow you feel grateful for that. You return home, open the old journal you haven't written in for a long time. The first page isn't pretty. The handwriting is shaky, uneven, nothing special. But as the pen touches the paper, it feels like you're knocking on the door of your soul. No one will read these words. But you, the one who was once abandoned in your own life, are finally listening again. We tend to think of rebirth as something grand, dramatic, but really, it comes in the smallest rhythms. It's choosing to get up every morning without waiting for someone to remind you. It's learning again how to eat a meal slowly, aware of what's on your plate. It's when you put down your phone, look out the window, and time no longer feels meaningless. Aristotle once said, "We are what we repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence is not an act, but a habit." And when you choose to keep doing the small, right things each day, even when no one notices, you're training yourself in quiet resilience. You were once the one who waited for a message all night, who gave up pieces of your life just to hold on to a relationship that had become hollow. But now, you understand, salvation doesn't come from the other side. No one can walk in and resurrect the parts of you you've neglected. Only you, with your own hands, can lift yourself from the dust. And you begin again. One journal page a day, 1 hour offline, one walk under the evening sky instead of curling up with old memories. No one sees this change, but you feel it, because when a soul begins to heal, it isn't loud, it glows slowly, like a quiet flame lighting up a once dark room. The old bike has started to move. Maybe it's not steady, maybe it wobbles, but it's going forward, and so are you, no longer the one sitting with the wound, a shadow waiting to be named. Now, you are returning to yourself, to the life that never stopped waiting for you. Strangely, you don't feel happy right away, but you feel lighter, as if you've finally set down a nameless burden you've carried for years. And sometimes, that lightness alone is enough to come back to life. Rebirth doesn't come with applause. It comes in the unseen moments, when you choose to eat a proper meal, not for anyone else, but for you. When you write down your feelings without fearing how clumsy they sound. When you look in the mirror and, for the first time in a long while, you don't see someone waiting to be loved, but someone learning how to love themselves again. No one can do that for you. Not someone from your past, not someone new, only you, and the small actions you repeat like quiet rituals, each habit, a stone laid down on the path back to yourself. And if someone ever asks when you started to heal, you'll smile and say, "It was the moment I chose myself." 7. When you become someone who can't be bought with a look or an apology. There's something strange about love. The one who leaves always comes back, right when you no longer need them. They don't know you once stayed up countless nights over words left unsaid, or how you sat silently in that old room, replaying the question, "Where did I go wrong?" They never saw the mornings you forced yourself to get up early, made a cup of coffee that tasted like nothing, just to hold together a bit of order in a life that felt like it was falling apart. But time passed, and just like wounds, though they might not heal completely, they no longer bleed. You no longer wait for messages, no longer choke on a simple scene. You start writing again, exercising again, living your days, not brilliantly, but peacefully enough. And it's exactly then that they appear. No loud knocking, just a familiar line in a text. "Hey, how have you been?" No clear reason, no honesty, just a touch of hesitation, a trace of probing, a flicker of regret, as if they've come back to see whether you're still there, the way you used to be. And if this were before, your heart might have fluttered, you might have rushed to reply, to hope again, but now you smile, not because you've forgiven them, but because you know you're no longer the person you once were. When your heart has grown strong enough, no glance can shake it. No late apology has the power to move you anymore. Elio, a man who once loved with everything he had, went through that. Back then, she left in silence, taking with her all the reasons never explained. Elio hurt so deeply that he didn't want to believe in anything good anymore. But he didn't fall. He started again with the smallest things, writing, reading, walking every evening, and nearly a year later, when he had rebuilt himself from the ruins, she reappeared. Same eyes, the same smile that used to make his heart soften, but this time, Elio just smiled, gently, like standing before an old painting, beautiful, but no longer his. He wasn't angry. He didn't blame her, and he didn't need an explanation, because the truth is, when you've learned to love yourself more than anyone else ever could, no one can buy you back with a look or a few overdue words. Like a train conductor who's already departed, he once waited long at an empty station, scanning the crowd, hoping someone would come. But when no one did, he gripped the wheel and moved forward. And when that final passenger suddenly raised a hand from far away, the train no longer stopped, not out of coldness, but because genuine love can't be reenacted with old gestures on a stage that's already gone dark. What they regret isn't your leaving, but the warmth you once gave them that no longer belongs to them. They miss the late-night talks, the messages sent without reason, the way you always stepped back so they could shine. All of that was energy, was unconditional giving, was a version of you that even you once abandoned, just to keep someone else happy. But now, you're no longer that version. You've become someone who chooses to save that energy for things far more worthy. You hold no grudge. You just no longer wish to be bought with the same old feelings. You understand now, real freedom isn't being loved by someone. It's no longer being bound by what you can't control. Stoicism never taught us to become numb. It taught us this: learn to govern your reactions, instead of trying to control the world around you. And that's exactly what you're doing. You're not trying to make them regret. You're simply choosing not to let your heart be tethered to someone who once walked away without looking back. When Elio told his story, there was no bitterness in his voice. He simply said, "The day she came back, I realized the man she missed wasn't me. It was the man who loved her so much he forgot himself." And that was the moment he understood. Real love has to begin with respecting yourself first. In this life, there will always be people who leave, always eyes that turn back, only when it's too late. But once you've moved past the need to be noticed again, you'll understand the most valuable thing isn't their return. It's your own. You don't have to slam the door shut. You don't need bold declarations. All you need is not to step out to greet them like you once did, to keep your hands for the things that don't make your heart shrink with each new hope, and to look at them with calm eyes. No anger, no waiting. That's when you'll know you've truly transformed. The train has already left the station. The passenger may regret it, they may wave, but you are now the one at the helm, and you know, more clearly than ever, where you're headed matters more than anyone who chose not to come along. 8. The artisan of your own life. Peace doesn't arrive the day you forget them. It comes the day you stop trying to find yourself in someone else's gaze. It's not a loud rupture, not a lightning bolt that splits the night. It's a morning like any other, quiet, soft. When you find yourself sitting there, no longer waiting for a message, no longer repeating the same question, why did they change? You're no longer looking for who was right or wrong, no longer wondering what's on their mind. You simply realize it's time to stop reaching outward and to turn inward. Your life is an unshaped block of stone. Every moment of love, every wound, every time you were overlooked, each left its trace. Some left cracks, some left edges, Some left rough surfaces that still have no name, but none of that makes you worth less. That is the raw material from which you will shape yourself, the artisan of your own life. No one else can pick up the chisel, no one else can take the hammer and patiently carve through the pain inside you. No one else understands well enough to know which pieces to keep, which to let go, which edges to smooth, and which to leave raw, so that you'll remember what you've lived through. Only you. Imagine this. You're standing in a silent workshop. No applause, no audience, just you and the stone called me, waiting to be sculpted into something meaningful. Not something to display, but something that allows you to live, not dependent on anyone else, to feel like you matter. Each small act you do today, a simple cup of tea made with presence, a journal entry written not in sadness, but as a quiet thank you to yourself for not giving up, a gentle run, not for image, but for the feeling of breath and motion, is a single stroke against that old form. If you repeat those small acts with kindness and patience, you're shaping the most profound version of yourself. Don't wait for someone else to make you feel whole. Even those who once made you feel deeply loved were also the ones who taught you to forget your own value. And if you keep looking for yourself in how others respond to you, you'll always be someone else's temporary sketch, never your own original form. There's something strange that happens. Once you stop craving recognition, you begin to see yourself more clearly, no longer blurred by anyone's gaze, no longer distorted by the quiet hope that someone might come back. What you see now, simply, is yourself. Not perfect. Someone who has fallen, been hurt, but who no longer allows the past to shape the future. Like a master sculptor, you learn to observe your pain without reacting. You stop blaming. You stop asking why. You begin to understand. Every block of stone has its roughness, and that roughness is what gives it depth. Stoic philosophy says, the only thing that truly belongs to us is our ability to choose, not how others feel about us, not the ending of a love story, but how we respond, how we move forward, how we choose to shape who we are in silence. And you, now, are no longer someone waiting at the door. You are someone carving into your foundation, steady hand, clear intention. You shape yourself with self-respect, with the discipline of choice, and with the light of awareness. They may come back, they may regret, they may remember the warmth you once gave, but none of it sways you anymore, because now you understand. Real peace doesn't come from being cherished by others. It comes from cherishing yourself, even when no one's watching. You are not a statue, you are not immobile, but you have a form shaped by every experience, every decision, every day lived with intention. And that form is the one creation no one can copy, no one can define for you. So if you find yourself standing in a quiet pause, after all the hurt, after all the unexplained goodbyes, don't rush to fill it with someone else. Begin with yourself. Live slowly enough to listen, deeply enough to understand what truly brings you happiness, and steadily enough that you no longer need anyone to affirm that you are worthy. You don't need to become someone else. You only need to become the best version of yourself, not to be loved, but to love yourself without condition. And that, precisely, is what makes you irreplaceable. Start carving your life today, not with tears, but with clarity, not by begging love from someone indifferent, but through the solid silence of someone who has chosen to stand by their own heart. And if someone who once led you astray happens to turn around and look back, this time you only need to smile, because now you know they may have hurt you once, but they will never be the one who shapes you. You already did that. You and only you are the true artisan of your own life. There are phases in life when you live as if your worth lies in someone else's eyes. One glance is enough to make you smile all day. A late night message is enough to make your heart tremble with hope. And so you wait, you try, you sacrifice, you live as if being good enough, sincere enough, will eventually make them see that you are worthy. But the deepest kind of pain doesn't come from someone failing to appreciate you. It comes from the moment you begin to doubt yourself because of it. You try to prove yourself, to please, to hold on, but without realizing that, bit by bit, you are trading away your self-respect for a love that no longer belongs to you. There will come a time when you suddenly understand you never really needed anyone's validation. What you lacked wasn't someone else's love, but the gentle gaze you had always denied yourself. No one can truly see you if you've been leaving yourself out of the mirror every morning. No one can love you deeply enough if you don't dare to stand by yourself first. And from that moment on, a great stillness begins to rise within. You no longer need anyone to come back. No explanations. No final conversation to close the chapter. Because you've chosen to move forward. Not because you've stopped loving them, but because you've finally learned to love yourself enough. If today your heart feels tired from waiting, if you're ready to stop the chase and return to living truthfully as yourself, then start with just one small thing. Admit to yourself that you are enough. You have always been enough, and all you need now is one firm, unwavering choice to stand by yourself, not for anyone else, but for a kind of peace that cannot be bargained away with fleeting emotions. Leave a simple affirmation under this video. No need for long explanations, just one sentence that says it all. I choose myself. Because in the end, the one who dares to step out of dependence is not the strongest person, but the freest one. And freedom, as Marcus Aurelius once wrote, doesn't lie in the right to walk away, but in the ability not to be controlled by someone else's gaze or silence. When you choose yourself, you no longer need anyone to hold you back, and you no longer need to be understood to walk forward. You live not to be seen, but to live in alignment with the light you already carry within you.